Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's conversation about the PFAS site. We have a discussion to take part in this evening for 1279 Rickett Road. This is a neighborhood informational webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's event. If Amy, if you're ready, Amy, if you could join me, I'll turn your camera on. We will get started here. As we go on, before we move on, we have several moving parts here. So Amy, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and have a review of the agenda and introduce our evening speakers, that would be great.
Very good. Yeah, my name is Amy Peterson. I'm Eagle's PFAS Operations Manager, and just want to kind of find out who all is on the phone real quickly, and then we'll go through and talk about the agenda and some housekeeping stuff real quick. So, do we have anybody on the phone, representatives or senators participating? Okay. How about local agency officials?
And if you are one of the local government officials that Amy is speaking of, if you could raise your hand electronically by selecting the hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom. We have a couple of hands that have come up, Amy. We have 4 hands that have been raised. So would you like to hear from them? Or?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, if you can call them, and Les, you can have them introduce themselves.
Sure, right. Okay. All right, just a moment. First one is Mark Charles. Mark, I'm going to unmute your mic. It's Mark St. Charles.
I am Mark St. Charles, Supervisor at Green Oak Charter Township.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Next, we have Heather Blair. Heather, if you can unmute your mic. Okay, we'll come back to Heather. Next one is Mona.
Hi, I'm Mona Shand. I'm the Livingston County Field Representative for U.S. Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin.
Okay, thank you for joining us. I'm going to go back to Heather Blair, see if we can. Oh, just a moment. Heather?
Yes, I'm here. I'm
okay.
Heather,
Go ahead.
Livingston County Health Department.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And that's all I have for hands raised at the moment.
Okay. So we cover all the local officials then?
We had some local officials, yes.
Okay. How about state agency staff? DHHS Eagle staff?
Rebecca Taylor, Eagle,
Okay.
Lansing District, Project Manager, Environmental Quality Analyst.
Gary Clace, DHHS Toxicologist.
Harry Castle, Community Engagement Coordinator with MDHHS.
David Lebrecht, Eagle RRD, Lansing District Supervisor.
Excellent. And are there any residents on the phone?
Amy, we have Matt
go ahead.
also.
Okay.
Matt, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, Matt Bolang, Livingston County Health Department. Thank you.
Perfect.
And we have one other hand up, and it's Christine. I want to allow her. Go ahead, Christine. Christine? Okay. We have Christine, I believe from MDART on as well.
Okay, Christine Kosmowski. Very
Yes.
good, thank you. Mhm. All right, did anybody else not announce themselves then?
I have no new hands
Anybody?
raised.
All right, perfect. All right, so what we're going to do this evening, we're going to talk just a little bit about logistics and housekeeping. We're going to ask the questions and answers get saved until the end. So Les will talk a little bit more about how we're going to take the Q&A part of this. For the agenda, I'm going to provide an overview of Impart to start things off. Then I'm going to turn it over to Gary Clace, who's going to talk about the health effects associated with PFAS. And then Rebecca Taylor, the site lead for this particular site, will talk about the investigation area. And then Les is going to help me navigate back to the Impart website real quickly so you can see a little bit about where we have tons of information online. And then we'll do the Q&A part. So with that,
Okay.
I think Les, you can go ahead and do the housekeeping part.
Sure. Okay, for this might be not new to many of you, and it could be new for some that are new to Zoom. All of your lines are muted, which means hopefully that you can hear us, but we won't be able to hear you. But we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions throughout this evening's conversation. I also want to let you know this webinar is being recorded for future viewing, and we will be posting this online at Eagle's YouTube channel, and that will be within a day or two following this evening's conversation. There are 3 ways which you can ask questions throughout tonight's conversation. You may type a question in the Q&A box located in the bottom of the Zoom control panel that's located at the bottom of your screen. You also may raise your hand, which some of you have practiced that already this evening. You can click the hand icon and I will see you electronically, and I'll try to unmute your mic, and you can unmute on your end so you can ask questions of this evening's panelist. And also, there is an opportunity for folks that are online. And this evening, we have 8 callers that are online in listen-only mode. So for those of you who are online, you can select star and the number 9 to electronically raise your hand, and I will see that. And if you do that, I'll try to unmute your line so you can ask questions of tonight's panelists as well. And with that, Amy, if you can come back on, I am finished with the housekeeping at the moment, and I will revisit this later on when we return to the Q&A portion of this evening's conversation.
Perfect. All right, next slide. And I think you can go on to the next slide. All right. So just an overview about Impart. So Impart is Michigan's PFAS Action Response Team, and we were set up under an executive order under Governor Whitmer. And Impart is coordinating the efforts of 7 different state departments. And those are the departments that are responsible for the environment, natural resource protection, public health, military installations, agriculture, fire stations, and commercial services airports. We believe that one of the reasons that Impart has been so successful, and we've been so successful in Michigan in addressing the PFAS situation, is our working so well with our other state agencies as well as our federal partners. And then certainly when we get down to the local level and we get down to sites like the one we're going to be talking about today, coordinating with our local officials as well. This Impart is basically directing the implementation of the state's action strategy, and we use a data-driven, science-based approach to our approach. Next slide, please. So PFAS are unique because they have such strong carbon-fluorine bonds. These are some of the strongest bonds known to chemistry. These compounds are surfactants. They're very, very stable in the environment. They were developed because they have the ability to repel water, oil, fat, and grease. The development of them began in the 1940s, and there's over 5,000 of these compounds in use today. If you go to the next slide, you can see some of the uses of PFAS, and it's used in a lot of different applications. Some of the more common ones people might be aware of are things like waterproof apparel up on the top, and then the AFFF foam for putting out fires down on the bottom right of that. But clearly throughout numerous industries, PFAS is being used. Next slide, please. So the reason we're concerned about this, in addition to the fact they don't break down easily because of that strong bond, is that they're widespread in the environment. Many of them, or some of them, bioaccumulate, which means they build up in our bodies. There are health effects associated with some of these, and there's not a lot of information about them. You know, considering there's 5,000 of these chemicals out there, we don't know a lot about many of them. And also there's a lack of national standards for these. Next slide, please. So we like to show this slide for a couple of reasons. One, it's showing that how we're moving PFAS around in the environment. So if you start off on the left of this, you have industry that's perhaps making widgets. In the process of doing that, they might be discharging their wastewater directly into the ground. They could be discharging that directly into a stream, or they could be also be discharging it to a wastewater treatment plant. Now, even if they discharge that wastewater with PFAS in it into the wastewater treatment plant, our wastewater treatment plants were not designed to treat for PFAS. So in some cases, the wastewater treatment plant, down kind of in the middle of the slide there, wastewater treatment plants could be discharging that directly into our rivers. Wastewater treatment plants are also dealing with sludge, which is going into the landfills, and you can kind of see how we're kind of moving some of this around. Wastewater treatment plants could also be applying biosolids onto our farm fields, and you can kind of see the rest of how that looks over here. But the other reason we like to show this slide is because we are also sampling at these points. So we are sampling at groundwater releases, at wastewater discharging, dischargers directly into our streams, dischargers going into wastewater treatment plants, the wastewater treatment plants themselves. We have sampled biosolids. And certainly when it comes to sites, and part of the reason we're having this discussion this evening is at the top right of the slide are residential homes. And certainly when we, you know, the first thing we want to do is make sure that there's no residential homes in harm's way. So we are sampling at all these different points. Next slide, please. Oh no. All right. So MPART implements a three-prong approach basically for finding PFAS sources. And one of those approaches is by doing surface water investigations. And that's, you know, surveying our lakes and streams. And if we find a spot that is over water quality standards, we will continue working upstream until we identify the potential source of that, you know, violation of water quality standards. Foam was mentioned here. We don't sample for foam anymore, but the foam sightings that people can report to us, we are using those to help drive where we're going to be doing water quality sampling. So we encourage people to continue to report out any foam sightings. And when we get to the MPART website, I'll point out kind of where that is. And also I mentioned as part of the surface water investigations I mentioned before on the previous slide, we do wastewater sampling. So next slide, please. So another part of our two-prong approach is doing sampling at drinking water locations. So this next slide, we'll talk about the public water supply testing that was done. Oh, can we go back one more slide? There were less, we advanced two of them there. So we did some public water supply testing, quite a bit of it in 2018 and 19. And this slide shows the various public water supplies that were tested during that time. So it was a fair number of water supplies. And you'll see at the last bullet there, we actually did some additional testing of some of the water supplies that use surface water systems as their water source. We did a lot of testing in 2018 and 19. If you go to the next slide, that pie chart is showing the results of all of that testing that was done. And you'll see that 90% of the public water supplies had no detections of any of the PFAS that were tested. And you can see on the left side of this, the screen there, the PFAS that were tested at the method, using the method that was in place at the time. So 7% of the water supplies had a total PFAS, all those PFAS added together, of less than 10 parts per trillion. And only 3% of the supplies had total PFAS added together of over 10 parts per trillion. And for those supplies, we provided recommendations to the water supplies about monitoring, about notifying their customers, about looking for potential sources and other options perhaps for treatment as needed. Also, of the 3% that were over the 10 parts per trillion, there were 3 systems that were over the EPA Lifetime Health Advisory level of 70 parts per trillion of PFOS and PFOA added together. And those supplies ended up getting an immediate response from MPART. We pulled together across all agencies using all of our resources to address those situations. So on to the next slide, please. So when it comes to drinking water standards, there's no federal standards that we could adopt. So in December 2018, we had put together a science advisory panel, and that panel came up with a report basically looking at all the available data at that time and saying that 70 parts per trillion standard for PFOS and PFOA added together, which was our standard at the time, was too high. They also suggested that we should be looking at other PFAS in addition to just PFAS and PFOA. So we then put together a science advisory work group. They provided what were called health-based values, which all fed into our working towards promulgating standards into rule for public drinking water supplies. So if you go on to the next slide. So these are what we call the maximum contaminant levels for 7 PFAS compounds. These were put into effect August 3rd, and these MCLs, or maximum contaminant levels, apply to 2,700 water supplies across the state. Now you'll see that there's a big red box around the PFOS and PFOA. Because there was already a groundwater cleanup criteria in place for PFOS and PFOA, when the new drinking water standards went into place, that 70 parts per trillion combined PFOS and PFOA automatically got lowered to 8 parts per trillion PFOA and 16 parts per trillion PFOS. So now all it takes to become an MPART site, which this particular site that we're talking about is an MPART site, it only takes 1 monitoring well, groundwater monitoring well, on a site to exceed either the 8 part per trillion PFOS or the 16 part per trillion PFOS to qualify as a site. It used to be the 70 combined. Okay, next slide, please. Also want to be clear that those 7 maximum contaminant levels that apply to the public water supplies don't automatically become cleanup criteria. So again, only the PFOS and PFOA got changed immediately on August 3rd when those new drinking water rules went into place. So we are going through the rulemaking process now for those other 5 MCLs before they will become groundwater cleanup criteria. And again, all this is important because this is important for how we define a PFAS site. So next slide, please. So this is the map of all of the sites that are called MPART sites. And we actually added a site today at 2 o'clock. So this is actually, we're 1 dot short actually at this point. But you'll see that we had 99 sites that exceeded that 70 parts per trillion PFOS plus PFOA criteria prior to August 3rd. And then since August 3rd, when the new lower criteria went into place, the 8 and the 16, we've added 49, or as of today, 15 new sites. So the third prong in our third prong approach is our groundwater investigations to continue to find more groundwater sites. We're prioritizing these based on what we think or what we know about potential sources out there, and also the potential for exposure. Our number 1 goal is always to protect drinking water pathways, i.e. residents in particular, and we have numerous other investigations underway. Next slide, please. So the last thing I'll mention is the Citizen Advisory Work Group. This is a work group that consists of residents from impacted communities, such as yours. This group gets together virtually for about an hour and a half, the second Tuesday of every month. And they are charged with 2 things. One is to recommend to MPART how to engage and empower communities. And the second is how to educate the general public. There's 2 subcommittees, and you can become part of those or become part of the larger Citizen Advisory Work Group. So if that's of interest to any residents on the phone, just reach out to me and I can get you hooked up to become a member of that. With that, I think I can turn this over now to Gary Claes, who I believe is going to do the PFAS and health part. Thanks, Gary.
All right, thank you, Amy. Hello, my name is Gary Claes, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So, working together with Eagle, we at your state and local health departments are here to investigate the health risks that may be facing your community and effective ways to address them in a timely manner. To do this, Eagle will conduct the site investigation and generate the data we need to assess the risks posed at this site, while the health departments will evaluate the data and determine what, if anything, needs to be done to protect residents. Next slide, please. Now, PFAS chemicals aren't new and they're not rare. These are widespread chemicals, as you heard about, that have been around for more than 50 years, used very broadly in industry, commerce, and many residential applications. They've been used to resist stains in clothing, carpets, and upholstery. They've been used in your food packaging and many other applications. These chemicals have been all around us. Today, our primary concern is in finding contaminated drinking water and fish and wildlife and eliminating those routes of exposure to people. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, PFAS have been around for a long time, and essentially everybody's been exposed to these chemicals at some point over their lifetimes. The good news is that some of the major PFAS chemicals have already been phased out of use. And what we're seeing is that blood levels of PFAS in the population have already been coming down. So while many people are just now finding out about these chemicals, in actuality, a lot of progress has already been made to identify and eliminate the risks of PFAS. Next slide. Now, health studies have shown that exposure to high levels of PFAS chemicals is associated with a number of health effects in humans. As you can see here, exposure to PFAS can reduce a woman's chance of becoming pregnant or increase her blood pressure during pregnancy. Some PFAS chemicals can also affect the thyroid, cholesterol, the immune system, and increase the risks of some kinds of cancer. Of course, our hope and our goal is to eliminate PFAS exposures and prevent these negative outcomes altogether. Now with that, I'll pass it to Rebecca Taylor at Eagle to tell us more about the investigation in Brighton. Thank you. Oh, wait,
Next slide.
I think this looks like an additional slide that wasn't in my practice slides. This might still be one of mine. Sorry about that. Okay, so there are multiple lines of evidence that we at the health departments use to evaluate the data when we get it. We have what we call the MDHHS comparison values. These are a number of public health screening values that we've determined to be protective of all people at all life stages. We look at the residential well results themselves, as well as, not just what your well result is in particular, but what's going on in your neighborhood, what's going on down the road. And we also look at site-specific information. What do we know about the way that groundwater moves by the site? What do we know about the geology? Are there protective clay layers over your drinking water? And a number of other factors. So we don't just look at one regulatory value, and we don't just look at the numbers in your water, but we look at a whole world of information to try to understand what's going on. Next slide, please. So again, these MDHHS comparison values, these are screening values that we use where the state of Michigan, MDHHS and MPART and Eagle came up with two different sets of PFAS numbers somewhat independently. And then we take those two sets of numbers and we chose the lowest of each one, the most protective from each set of numbers to use as our comparison values. So we're essentially using the lowest numbers in play, the most protective numbers in play in the state of Michigan to protect residents' health. And again, these were set to protect everyone, including all life stages, including children and unborn children. Next slide. And then here's the list of those values. And the next slide again. So again, we look at not just one individual well result, but we look at all of the results together. If you look at these two images, we've got two scenarios where the yellow house in the middle of each one has PFAS detected, but they're below our comparison values, those decision-making numbers we said. But they're two different scenarios. In the one scenario, we've got a low-level PFAS detection surrounded by a bunch of homes with no PFAS detected. So this tells us there's probably not much going on in the neighborhood. Person's well could be impacted by perhaps their own septic system or another localized source, and so they may not need a public health response. Whereas the scenario on the right, we have that same home with a low-level PFAS detection, but surrounded by higher level PFAS detections. And this tells us that there's some sort of high strength source that's impacting the entire area. And so this is a scenario where we would bring in a public health response, not just for the homes with the exceedances, but also for that home with a low level detection, because this high strength source could hit their home as well. Next slide. And again, we look at more than just the numbers. What do we know about the geology? What do we know about the way that groundwater moves at this site? What do we know about how deep the well is? what do we know about the area impacted by the contaminants? We're looking at what we call a conceptual site model. We're looking at as much information as we can gather at the site to understand what's going on, because your well results will tell us what happened the day that the sampling crew was there. Doesn't tell us what happened in 6 months or in a year, but we can start to understand these things by looking at the whole picture. Next slide. Okay, so there are a number of public health response actions that we could take or not take at any given site, including this one. Depending on what we see in the data and the site model, it may be that no public health response is necessary and everyone can continue to drink their water, which is of course the outcome that we hope for whenever we go into this. We may recommend the use of a filter or use of some other alternate water, such as bottled water, or eventually in some cases, an extension of municipal water to the neighborhood. A lot of times we'll use filters because we don't necessarily see a dramatic problem, but we can't rule it out either. So a filter buys us time. It ensures that you have clean water this month, this year, so that we can conduct a more robust investigation to reach a final conclusion. We also use education. We can teach you about what's going on in your water. We can teach you about the effects of PFAS, and we can teach you what's going on in your neighborhood. So these are just a number of the options at our disposal based on the outcome of the investigation. Next slide. Okay, and with that, I'll pass it to Rebecca Taylor at Eagle. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Taylor. I'm with Eagle, Lansing District Office. I'm the project manager for this particular PFAS MPART site at 1279 Rickett Road in Livingston County. My contact information is below. Next slide. So the red dot is the location of this particular property. And this property is a light manufacturing from 1985 to 2020. Various fluid coupling, fabrication, engineering, metal coating, finishing operations occurred at that property. And we did not find out that there was a PFAS issue until August of 2020, when a property transaction liability protection document known as a baseline environmental assessment was submitted to us. So we did see a PFAS in the shallow groundwater many times above criteria. So next slide. So this map simply shows Summit Street and Rickett Road, where this facility is. If you drive down the road, you'll see Work Skills. Business is occupying the property now. There is another business involved with testing GM parts that occupies the back of the building. But those little red boxes, which you can't see, show where the PFAS detections were located. And the one area where it was high was next to a chemical storage facility, where they had the PFAS containing compounds stored outdoors. So in May and April, 4 samples were collected. The red boxes represent the PFAS samples results, and only one sample was really high, and that was the one that was at 2,900 parts per trillion PFOS and 130 part per trillion PFOA, which is significantly over the criteria. At the time we received this document, there was no site-specific information concerning groundwater flow, no information on site geology. It was simply data from temporary wells. But recently, late October, the previous property owner installed 8 shallow groundwater monitoring wells, and they spaced them around the site. So next slide, please. So the little black and white circles show various monitoring wells. And if you take the laser pointer and go to this one, to the top monitoring well, to the top of the screen, there's 2 wells close to each other. That's the general source area where the highest concentrations are. And Recently, we had staff collect groundwater samples. So the consultant for the private party collected samples. Eagle collected samples to compare results. And we just got those results back Friday. And the results indicate that where the highest PFOS was situated in monitoring well 1, it was still the highest concentration, but it had gone down considerably. The well that was sampled went dry when we sampled it, so it wasn't the greatest sample. It's probably going to be higher in the spring when we resample this well. But in any case, if that is the source area, the contamination appears to be migrating to the southwest based on where the contaminant footprint is. So next slide, please. So this picture just shows some of the apparatus that Eagle uses to collect groundwater samples. The person in yellow is Eagle staff. The person in the darker clothes is the private consultant. And our Eagle staff do wear masks for COVID protection. And so she's collecting the sample. There is tubing that's inserted in the monitoring well, which basically is just a pipe in the ground intersecting the water table. And that tubing is about halfway where the screen is. Tubing slowly, the equipment pumps out water very slowly, goes into a bucket until the field reading parameters stabilize, and then a sample is collected to represent what we think is in the groundwater at the under natural conditions. And PFAS-free containers are used while we collect the samples. So it just shows you all the equipment that we use. Next slide, please. Okay, because we had no information to speak of regarding the technical details we need to make decisions with, Eagle requested that the Michigan Geological Survey evaluate site geology and make some good estimate as which way groundwater flow direction is going, because Eagle and the health department were completely aware that there are numerous residential wells south of outside of the Brighton Municipal Water System. So the next few slides are a bit technical, but I hope it will help you understand some of the things we look at to make our decisions with. Next slide, please. So this particular slide is just sort of a layout of what the geology is like underground, what the last advance of the glacier left behind. So the pink represents outwash, which is sand and gravel deposits. So you're looking at stream channels and outflow from glaciers. And then the clay deposits are in brown, and that's from the glacier grinding up rocks as it retreats and leaving a lot of clay and mixed grain sizes behind. So the brown tends to be denser, and water has a harder time traveling through it. In the pink area, water has a much easier time traveling through it. And that's where people draw their water from, in those pink units. And some of those pink units are close to the surface, and some of them are much deeper. And in this particular area in Green Oaks Township, a lot of the wells are in the newer subdivisions are well over 120 feet deep, some 180. There are a few homes in the area, like old farmhouses, that have shallower wells. So next slide. So this is a rather confusing slide, but what I'm trying to show with this slide is that you'll see the arrows going in divergent locations. And when the technical data is looked at, you look at a lot of the surface drainage patterns, like where the Huron River goes, where Orr Creek goes, and at 1279 Rickett Road, it's pretty close to what we call a groundwater divide. So groundwater can go in a different direction. There's a site, contamination site to the north by about 1/3 of a mile, and that water goes to the northeast towards Orr Creek. And at this site, it appears that the groundwater is going directly towards the Huron River, which is to the southwest. So this is based on basically a lot of surface drainage and an evaluation of where the wells are and the water levels in the wells. So this is what the Michigan Geological Service does when they do a triage, when they're trying to figure out what's going on at the site when we don't have much geological information. So next slide. So this slide is just shows some of the where a lot of the wells are. Some of them in the little green triangles are in glacial drift, meaning sand and gravel deposits. And there are a few that are set in rock, not too many in this area because the bedrock does not produce very good water. And there are those little white hash marks or cross sections which show the wells and the geology and what's represented in the wells that were set into the outwash deposits. So the one that you're going to see next is the one to the southwest of where Rickett Road is, where that little tiny yellow star is. So next slide. So this is just a representation on the S side, that's south, and that's lower towards Lee Road, and then as you go towards Brighton, you get to Brighton Lake, and there's the elevation of Brighton Lake, and then you go up towards Rickett Road, and it's a little bit higher than Brighton Lake. So what those vertical lines are, they just represent the type of geologic formations that the residential wells in the area are screened in. So it shows that it's glacial drift, shows that many of the wells are quite deep, and there are a few wells that are shallower. So in the area immediately to the south of Rickett Road in Green Oaks Township, most of the wells that we'll be looking at are fairly deep. There are a few shallower wells in that area. So next slide. Okay, this slide shows where the site is, and those little arrows are where we think the groundwater flow is going to the southwest, and 20 wells in the Pleasant View subdivision were the ones that were closest to where the PFAS release was, are going to be evaluated by sampling for PFAS at the residential wells. So what Eagle did is we sent about 20 letters out to people living in the area that we wish to sample first to see if there is a problem that's migrated. And frankly, we don't think there is much of a problem because of all the clay layers that show up in the residential well logs that will protect people's drinking water just by virtue of it making hard for PFAS to migrate down. But in any case, we need to look. And those residential wells were selected for sampling based on how close they were to the release, and some of the ones in the direction of groundwater flow and the uncertainty of it. And there were a few that were shallow, and I did find one house that had a well in the basement. So you definitely want to look at that one. So we did send letters out to people who are in the first area of concern, and they have forms with them for permission to grant permission for Eagle to sample. Those forms, if you've got one, will be sent to the health department, and if you send it to Eagle, that's all right. The health department will get a copy and we share the information. We're just looking for basic contact information and where your address is, so we can let our contractor AECOM know, so we can schedule sampling. And usually we use the outside tap because of COVID, and we have all the COVID protocols, so we don't want to make contact with anybody if at all possible. So it's important to get contact information on those forms so that we can limit, exposure to people while we collect the samples. So next slide. So based on our sampling results, and usually it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to get sample results. Review the sampling results. We validate the information to make sure the lab or the samplers didn't make big mistakes that would invalidate the results. And then we communicate with the Department of Human Health and Services and Livingston County Health Department, usually an internal Zoom meeting, and discuss the results. And if nothing is found, then that's great, and people will be notified by letter one way or the other. But in this particular area, there is kind of an outlier area of concern. And the facility that we found the PFAS in has a plant number, a different plant on Summit Street that a property transaction found some PFAS with only one groundwater sample that was below criteria, so that we know there may be another potential PFAS site that's in the area. So we've got that place in mind, and we may be asking the party that owns that property to do a little bit more work to find out if there really is a problem over there or not. Right now, it's just one sample, not a problem, but there could be a problem because it's the same type of business. So basically, we look at the geology, we look at the results of our sampling, and we look at the information at each of these sites that are collected from groundwater and soil samples. And we make decisions as to whether or not there's a potential risk for PFAS in groundwater that might migrate to somebody's well. Right now, the encouraging thing is that the contamination at the property of concern is shallow, and most people's wells are quite deep. So there's a lot of protection to prevent migration of contamination way down deep. But things can happen, and it has happened if a well is getting old and the grout layer has failed or has some other construction issue. It's possible for shallow contamination to get down. It's not very common, but some of the older wells, some have had that problem. So that's why we look. We're not dead certain that everything is all right. So we just want to make sure that the area of concern, which is closest to the site, is going to be sampled, and we have no issues with other wells in the area. But until we get that information, we can't really make a determination. So we hope that you folks who got the request to sample the wells will return your forms to us so we can get going on this before your outside taps freeze and collect the samples and let you know if you have an issue or not. So that's about all I have. Next slide. So I'm going to introduce Matt Bowling with the Livingston County Health Department, and this is his contact information. Livingston County Health Department are our partners for deciding whether or not to proceed. I will just put in that if you're worried about your wellhead protection area, that we have looked at the wells that are in the area and they've been sampled, and we haven't seen any issues with PFAS of any significance. So Matt?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, just real quick on the contact information here for me. I'm local health departments act as liaison between the state agencies, the Department of Health and Human Services, and then an Eagle on these investigation sites. So if anybody on the call would like to talk to the health department directly, we can kind of talk through the procedure on this sort of thing. Rebecca is really the expert on what's going on at the site and the environmental investigation there. And I can kind of talk about some of the health things along with Gary with DHS. So anyway, I just want to say hi to the folks on the call, and if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. My phone number's there. Also on the letters that you got from Eagle for permission to sample, our main office number is on there as well, where you can call our staff. And if you just prefer to give us a phone call, you can at our main number. That's 517-546-9858. You can call our office and just answer a few questions that's on that form, and we can get you recorded to be sampled. So with that, I don't know who's next, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Amy, I believe, while we're waiting for Amy to join us, just wanted to take a moment to welcome some additional attendees that just joined us with this evening's conversation about 1279 Rickett Road. Amy, when you're ready, we can talk about the Impart website.
Just real quick, Les, if you can navigate to that Impart website real quick. You can
Sure,
see
just a moment.
Perfect, thank you. So I just want to touch on just a couple of places on the Impart website, and we'll walk you through everything, and then we'll dive into questions here in a second. But so all of the sites, when we do presentations, all of our sites are online. And so you'll see at the top of the website, the tab called Investigations. If you click on Investigations and you click on PFAS sites, and if you go down to the bottom of the PFAS sites, you see a searchable form here on the right-hand side. It says search. You can type in Rickett Road, and it will take you to the link right there. The site name, you click on that and you go right to the write-up for Rickett Road. So future updates on this particular investigation will be located at this spot right here. But it has its own webpage, and Rebecca as a site lead will keep things updated here as we move forward with the investigation. So the other thing that I wanted to point out was under the drinking water tab. If you could click on that, Les. Thank you. And then you click on In Your Home. And then laboratories offering home testing. There's a list of laboratories and other information here on including home sampling guidance information. If anybody was interested in doing their own testing, there's a list of labs here, including the Eagle Lab, but certainly other labs as well, that will send residents test kits at a cost, of course. So if you're outside the sampling area, and again, Rebecca mentioned there were 20 letters that went to residents who are included in the current sampling area. But if there's other people on the phone who are interested in doing their own testing, this is where you can go online to get information about doing that. So other things to point out real quick, there's, and you don't have to click on any of these lists, but lots of information under the health tab, lots of different, FAQ kind of documents in different languages, whole bunch of good stuff on that. Under testing is a bunch of sampling protocols. That's probably the main thing here, but there's also information about PFAS on foam on lakes and streams, and also a little bit more on what we do for wastewater treatment plant sampling and sampling that we do on lakes and streams. So this particular page just got updated today, actually. And then under fish and wildlife, deer hunting season is upon us here now. So there's information here on PFAS in deer as well as PFAS in fish. And then the foam page, again, this is just another way of getting to that surface water foam page. And then we just recently updated the firefighting foam page as well. And then Impart stuff shows you the structure of Impart and has recordings of our various meetings and public meeting calendar that you can link on from here as well. So all the big events that we do, we advertise on the public meeting calendar here. All right, so with that, let's open it up for questions and answers.
Okay, Amy, thank you, and thank you for all the presenters for the presentation. Great presentation tonight. We had a couple of attendees that came in a little late, so I want to go over the housekeeping again for anyone who has questions for this evening's panel. That was Amy Peterson, Rebecca Taylor, Gary Cleese. If you have questions about anything you heard about the investigation, the health effects, tonight's good. We have time here tonight to answer those questions. We have approximately 25 attendees on right now that are still with us. So we'd be happy to entertain the questions and answer those questions for you this evening. Yes, we have 25 attendees on. We have, of those 25, 6 are on the phone. If you're on the phone, you can raise your hand electronically by selecting star and the number 9 to electronically raise your hand. If those that are watching this evening's webinar would like to ask a question verbally, you can click the hand icon located in the bottom of your screen, and I have a hand. So I'm going to I'm going to unmute Julie. Julie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your mic. So you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I am not in the sampling area. However, close enough nearby, and so much of our water is connected. How much is the, if we do our own sample, what is the approximate range for doing the sampling on our own and contacting the labs that are listed at your website? And I have a second question too.
All right. Thank you, Julie, for your question. Amy, can you take that question?
I sure can. Yeah, this is Amy Peterson. So yeah, our website has got a bunch of different places, and the rates do vary. Some of them will offer at a cost of somewhere between $75 and $100. I have a technician even come out to your house if you want to do that on top of the analytical cost. I'm not familiar with all of them. I haven't looked at that particular site in a while. But I believe that Eagle's drinking water lab is competitive, and our rate is, I believe, $290 for that one sample. And what you'll get is a kit in the mail. You'll follow their instructions. You'll put your sample back in there and mail it back, and then you'll get your results back directly from the lab.
And is there only one like grouping? Because I know PFAS is a huge group of products. So is there is it pretty obvious which group we are supposed to be selecting to sample for?
Oh, so yeah, so the current standard right now is called EPA method 537.1, and that's the method that most of the labs are using. That analyzes for 18 of the compounds, and that's probably the most commonly used sampling method. There are other labs out there that will use what's called an isotope dilution method, a different method, if you will, and some of those will actually analyze for more than the 18 parameters. But the Eagle Lab and many of the others are following the EPA 537.1, which again is 18 of the PFAS compounds.
Okay, thank you. And I did get on a little bit late, and I missed what facility we actually had the release from.
I'll take that question. I'm Rebecca Taylor from Eagle Lansing District Office at 1279 Rickett Road. It's where Work Skills is located right now. If you go down Rickett Road, you can see it. It's got a big American flag in front of it. So it's within the Brighton city limits. It's near the intersection of Summit and Rickett on the east side.
Okay. But it was an industry release?
It was manufacturing, yeah, they made coatings. So I'm assuming that PFAS was involved in some of the coatings.
Thank you.
Hey, Julie, this is Amy Peterson again. Hey, one more point for you. I'm not sure if we got into this in great detail, but if this first round of sampling does show, some concerns of the first round of homes that are sampled, we will stage this out and do another, expand the investigation out, further.
Okay.
We've done that in many other areas. It's not a one and done. It's a, based on the results, we decide if, we're done or if we need to go out further into the community. So just so you're aware of that. Other thing is usually once we get out into the community and collect these samples, we can have results back within about 3 weeks now. So if that helps with your decision making at all, I just thought I'd pass that on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have some questions that have come in, and I'm going to, just a moment. Okay, so we have questions that have come in writing. And the first question I have is from a resident in the area. I am just south of the testing houses, but still on Meyer Road or Meyer Avenue. Will I be notified if any of these testing houses test positive?
Basically, Amy might be able to speak to this, but we do update the MPART website. And if there is enough of a concern, people's houses testing positive, then what will happen is that we'll be expanding the sampling area, as Amy said, and then people will be contacted regarding why we are expanding the sampling area, which is based on the data that we have. So our MPART websites, the site description has a detailed description of what's going on. So it includes what we found, the next steps, and so you can get information that may forewarn you that you may be contacted about future sampling if we do indeed find that there's a problem.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. Next question. When should we be hearing about coming over to test our water? And since we will have to return our outside, since we'll have to return our outside water back on, how will we be contacted? This particular resident stated that they've already sent their form back last week, so they're asking about when someone's going to contact them for testing.
So based on the return of the forms, we're hoping to get a few people turn in their forms so we'd have enough to sample. So with your contact information, the contractor that we've hired to collect the samples, AECOM, will make a contact, or I can contact based on the form and let the contractor know. But the long and short of it is that these will be scheduled. You're not just going to have somebody pop up on your yard to collect the sample. So we'll schedule it with you and work with you for collecting the sample.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that answer. Gary Claes, I think this one's for you. The question is, what are the filters that were mentioned by Gary, and are they available to the public?
Yeah, so there's a couple main types of filter technologies out there. We're using the activated carbon filters that are certified for PFAS removal. So there's a certification that applies to a number of filters out there that we can provide more information on if you contact us. But we use a particular model of Aquasana filters. It's activated carbon technology that pulls the PFAS out. So yes, probably on the MPART website, there's more information about the specific filter. Or if you contact us or the local health department, we can get you the specific models that we use. But they are pretty widely available. They just go in under your sink. We usually recommend having a plumber do it, but home handymen can do it themselves, handy women. Yeah, pretty basic filter technology.
Okay, thank you, Gary. We have still a few questions left, and I just want to remind everyone, you can still type in a question in the Q&A box, which people are doing, which is awesome. If you're on the phone, again, you can try *9 to electronically raise your hand, and hopefully I'll see you so I can unmute your line. The next question here concerns testing results. The concern is from one of the residents is what happens if you have PFAS detections? I mean, can we talk about what the next steps will be if there's detections in a sample?
I can take that one.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Yeah, so it really depends on what the detections tell us. So like we showed on the one PowerPoint slide earlier, we're looking at more than just the data. We're looking at what we know about the site as a whole. But basically, if we see high levels of PFAS in anybody's water, at least those people are going to get filters. And then we may also provide filters to nearby homes, depending on if we think that PFAS is migrating. If we find low levels of PFAS in somebody's water, then we've got to start really looking at the details. Are these levels that we think could cause a health concern? Are they levels that we think might go up over time? There's just kind of a world of information that we look at, but the likely outcomes are either that we'll determine that the situation is safe and your water is fine to drink, or that we need to install some sort of a filter, maybe provide bottled water, and then start looking at long-term solutions. Do we need to run municipal water into the area, or some other long-term solution?
Okay, all right, thanks, Gary. I don't have any new questions at the moment. I just want to remind everyone, if anyone joined us late, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted live. It will be posted on Eagle's YouTube channel within the next day or two. So we will get that out to you. We'll also be able to share a link to you if you would like to watch the entirety of the webinar this evening. So, so stay tuned for that. We do have, Amy, do we have a contact slide for our staff?
Do we have a contact slide for Chris?
For our panelists, yeah. Let's see,
Oh, for-
Rebecca.
Yeah, for Rebecca. Yep.
Okay. So we have Rebecca's contact information here, but we could also, you know, if you have questions and you're trying to reach one of the other panelists here, you can either try Rebecca or you can even try me. My telephone number, my name is Les, last name is Smith. I am with Eagles Environmental Support Division, and my direct dial is 517-285-8148. So if you're trying to reach one of the panelists and you can't reach them after tonight's conversation, reach out to me and I'll try to get you connected with the panelists this evening. Amy or Rebecca or Gary, do any of you have any closing remarks or final thoughts? So we don't have any new questions at the moment, but maybe there's still a chance someone may ask one.
I just have a closing remark regarding relative risk at the site. I just want to reemphasize that there are a lot of factors that are probably protecting people's drinking water supply. The fact that the contamination was found shallow, the fact that when the consultant completed a boring, they did find some clay below the first level of groundwater, which is encouraging. So there's a lot of barriers to prevent contamination from migrating down deep. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's encouraging. The things that we're seeing that we know right now are encouraging with regard to people's drinking water safety. A lot of the sampling is precautionary, and we hope that we don't find anything, but certainly we will act upon it if we do find something, if we find any indication that additional information at these properties indicate that the groundwater has made it down deeper. That will certainly influence our decision-making process moving forward.
Okay, very good. Amy, any final thoughts?
No, if there's no more questions. I just want to thank everybody for spending hour or so of their evening today with us. And again, reach out to any of us if you have any other questions or concerns about what you heard, or certainly reach back if you haven't, didn't get the whole picture and you still have questions and you don't want to raise them during the call. That's what we're here for. So thank you.
And again, also, I will say thank you to all. Wait, I have one question. I have a hand. Mr. Mark St. Charles, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. And I don't have a question, but as I sat here listening, I want to thank everybody who participated in this. I found it, informative and interesting. And I just want to say to Rebecca or Matt, any assistance you need from Green Oak Charter Township, I'm here anytime you need us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Also, before we go, I just wanted to let everyone know that I put some messages in the chat for you for links that were discussed and included in the web page. So I've included my contact information. If you can't reach one of the panelists that you may have a question later on, reach out to me and I'll get you connected to the team here. I also provided the website address for Eagle's YouTube channel, in case you want to check that again in the next day or so for the recording of this evening's conversation. And then lastly, I included the MPART PFAS response webpage in the chat so you can download that for accessing the website that Amy showed earlier. Do not have any new questions or new hands raised. So with that, thank you all for spending time with us, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you.